I live in a town where you can still hear church bells chime on a Sunday morning, where families gather with pride to watch their children grow like flowers in the sun. We honor the brave who sacrificed for our country and those who continue to serve and protect us. In the spirit of love, belonging, and acceptance, this program was created. I'm Marie Wyman, and welcome to Close to Home. Welcome to Close to Home. Today's guests are Massie Blackburn and her brother Joseph Massie. They are the authors of a book called The Ghosts of St. Anne's Past. Thanks for coming, Rosie and Joe. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
And welcome back, Rosie.
Thank you for having us again.
We did part one with Rosie a while back, and it's great to have you both here today with her brother Joe.
Appreciate it.
Joe's going to highlight today some of the things that he feels are very, very important in getting the story out about the ghosts of St. Anne's. Why don't you go ahead, Joe?
Well, the first thing is this is a coping mechanism that we've written into this book for all the people who were at there, or their families and their friends, everybody that we have talked with and sent us emails and posted things. Mm-hmm. First of all, I'd like to thank my family and friends of St. Anne's Orphanage for supporting us, a Facebook page, and now we have a website, www.saorphanage.com. Mm-hmm. And I said we've been sending out lots of books, free books to everybody, for the people who have actually experienced all this. And any of the people who have not received any books, please email us, and we'd be glad to send them the books. If they wish not to do it that way and wish to purchase it, they can go to Amazon.com, or they can actually go to our website and purchase the book as well.
Oh, that's very generous for both of you.
Yeah. Again, we're not here to make money on this book here. We're here to provide this book to the family and friends.
Information.
Yeah. It's for the people out there.
Right. It started kind of interesting. There was an interesting way it started. Why don't you give us a little background on how it started?
Yeah, that was interesting because Rosie's husband had recently passed this in 2015, and we had her come visit with us and stay with us for a while up in New Hampshire when we were living there. And we started talking about our past and saying, we never really talked about our time in the orphanage, the orphanage. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so we said, well, let's go take a trip down to Worcester, an hour and a half, 2 hour drive. Drove down there, stopped at the Worcester Public Library.
And a lot of emotions came out at that time. And I know because the first time we talked about it, Rosie and I, the first program we did, mm-hmm. We thought to ourselves, boy, this is a closure. This is going to be something that is put into place. And people really understood that were part of St. Anne's, the orphanage. Yeah. And they got in contact with you, Joe, didn't they?
Yes.
And Rosie, too, on the website.
Right.
You developed a website.
Right. We started out, once we were down in Worcester and saw newspaper articles and reinforced mm-hmm. our dreams, our memories, that were little snippets that we had. Mm-hmm. And with that, we went on back home and said, we got to do more. We got to do more. We got to go find out
who we are and where we were,
right.
why we were there.
And so many people have that.
Yes.
So many people have experiences when they're young, mm-hmm. and they don't have the life experience. They don't have anything to measure it by. Their experiences are kind of lost.
Right.
And they need to understand what happened to them to have closure as adults.
Right.
And you talk about that.
And that's the thing too. Yeah. When we were looking at this, we got to find out this information. We have to set up a Facebook page. We didn't really know what a Facebook page was, but we went in there and started putting stuff together, going to different places. We even drove up to Montreal, Canada, to the Grey Nuns to get information, find out what St. Anne's was, what it was all about. And more and more people were sending us information that they had.
They wanted
and-
to know,
And they
too.
wanted to know stuff, Where were these people? We couldn't help them find a lot of things, but we could guide them.
Right.
We guided them to logbooks that were the Catholic Christians charities of Worcester had, and people were able to find out exact dates that they were there, and some about their adoptions through that as well, and then also to Massachusetts. What do you call it? DFAX, I don't know if you call it DFAX here, but something similar to that, the Department of Family Services, to find out more about what they had within the system, the Massachusetts system. So those things help them to move forward and find more about themselves. Same thing with us. So we shared everything we found, every picture that we found, we put on there. We had people emailing us, and it made it good for everybody because they were experiencing other people's stuff too, and the situations that they had.
And I understand from the first program, it just kind of evolved. And you
Right.
guys
yeah.
decided, you know what? We
got
need
bigger
to
and bigger.
write a book.
It was
This-
actually my wife, because we were sitting there doing
And
all the
her
stuff.
name's Christine.
My
We
wife
give her
Christine said,
credit for
you
this,
guys
huh?"
should sit down and write a book.
Right, good for her.
And Rosie went, ta-da, yes, yes.
Yes, we should do that.
Yeah.
And a lot of times things that are really important in life come about that way.
Sure.
Right.
Because other people are experiencing
Right.
what you experienced.
Right.
And want to share it with the world and want
Yeah.
to share it with whoever needs to have that message.
Right.
And that's what happened to both of you, isn't it? You
Right.
went through kind of an emotional
Right.
definition, when you saw these things like the grotto, which was
Right.
interesting. So you set the book up. You set the book up in like a journey through time.
Yes,
it was
yeah,
really
and that was interesting. Rosie came up with the Ghost of St. Anne's Pass. I said, okay, well then we need to go back. We need to give 3 things in the book. Number 1, we need to give the history of St. Anne's because that's what it's all about. What happened? Why were we there in the 50s, and how did it get to that point? Then we said, okay, we've got all these stories from all these people, and we had them going all the way back to the 1890s. We had stories. We had
people,
Sister
yeah.
Victoria, who was one of the first children
Right,
who were
I
there,
read
and
that. Yeah.
she began the storyline for us. Okay, and then from that point on, it went on to the little buckboard ride that we took
Right, the
for,
little
for 20
farmers,
years.
the
We
little
took that little
farmers.
Violet
and we
and,
took
yeah,
that
and Otto.
Violet and Otto through that, and it showed the history too of the world and what was going on.
set
And
against the background of
and
what
it-
was
and it-
really happening at the
Right.
time.
Yes,
And
yeah.
it showed
during
what the
that
children
time
had
period.
to do to survive there also and help.
And it was good because between that and then we went on to using the different mediums where, again, we had the buckboard ride through the time. We visited the Worcester Fair in the
Right.
1950,
Right.
that time frame.
Right.
And then after that, we went on to stage shows in the 20s, and then it went on to TV, radio, and finally in the 60s when we finished up, we ended up at the grotto through space warp times and through the
little
TARDIS and that type
suspension
of
of
thing.
reality, I
exactly,
guess it was,
exactly.
but it was fun, though.
And yes,
That was my
to
favorite
get
but we
that,
tried to
yeah.
move things around so that it wasn't just a boring story about the same thing, and
Right.
hopefully people got enjoyment out of it and that type of thing. You had the landing at the end, as I said, where we finished up the book, the storyline with us at the grotto with the thousands, 11,000 plus children, the ghosts of St. Anne's Pass,
Going to the
passing
gates.
through the gates of heaven as they watched the destruction of the 75-year-old St. Anne's Orphanage and the rebirth of Mount St. Anne.
It was
Which is
heartbreaking.
now still buildings are still at the site, which are in the process of being demolished sometime in the near future.
Yeah,
So
very interesting.
after 125 years, St. Anne's / Mount St. Anne's / the Yuval House is slowly
Youville,
coming to an end.
Yeah, right, right.
And,
And that was off of Granite Street,
and
correct?
that's, it's 132
Yes.
Granite Street. The grotto is still there.
Right, that's what Rosie said. I
right.
was surprised.
Right. This
I
is a-
haven't had a chance to check that out, but
Yeah.
I wanted to.
Right.
Right.
ride
the,
by and
the
see
high
this.
school. There's a
High
high
school
school has
behind
taken
it.
over 50 acres of behind the grotto. It was a total of 150 acres
Oh,
on this
wow.
farm.
Wow.
And the actual
Right.
farm that was being taken care of initially had 14 acres. I mean, that's huge.
That's
14
huge.
acres of farmland.
That's a lot
that we
to
were,
keep
the children
up,
and the
isn't it?
farmers were,
Wow,
Right.
that's a
taken
lot.
care of. So,
And so, to kind of give people a little summation of the genesis, let's say, of how this happened, it was a natural progression of feelings that came out, and many people identified with you. And I know,
Exactly.
Joe, you and I had some contact before the show, and you had written up an outline, and
Yes.
it was very interesting, and you go through a lot of salient points that you wanted to make, and I wanted to, I wanted you to get to
Right.
that too as well.
well, as time permits, we'll do what we can.
Yeah,
Squeeze
right,
what we can.
exactly. We
Yeah.
have a time constraint, obviously, but I know this was important for you and Rosie to talk about
Yeah.
this.
Sure.
This
Well-
is a more in-depth program than the first program because
Yeah.
there was so much information that we wanted to get out for
Right.
people to many
Right. We-
people might be even watching that have had the experience that you and Rosie have had.
Right.
So it's important.
Again, one of the coping mechanisms here is to understand what St. Anne's Orphanage was. Because as children, we were just tossed into this place, unknown place to us. We were confused. We were
Strangers.
scared. Yeah. The children were taken
They-
away from their homes.
Yeah, they didn't
You know.
know any better. I mean, that was what happened.
Right.
Right.
Back in the day, when people, unfortunately, they were falling through the cracks, and they had no way of supporting themselves, or there were addiction issues.
Right.
Children unfortunately, suffer the children, and that's what
Right,
happened.
and that's what we noticed with the different stories that we got from the children, that each and every single one was an individual situation. So I could sit
Exactly.
here and spend the next 4 hours just going through the people that I've talked to and emailed and posted, that they posted about their stories. And we just don't have the time to do that. So
Yeah.
we just basically say that we are all in the same place. We all ended up the same place together. How we got there is only personal to those people.
Right.
And does not need to be discussed. What we need to talk about is more or less what the children went through while they were there.
Right.
You had to understand, as I said, the facility first. It was, as I mentioned earlier, that it's a corporation in all reality. This is one of the largest orphanages in New England. Its capacity was over 250, we call them inmates.
Yeah.
You call them
I
inmates.
thought that was odd when I read that. I
Yes,
said,
Rosie even
inmates.
mentioned that to me. I said,
Yeah,
but
inmates.
in a book, you look
But
in there,
you
one of
want
the
us
questions I have is, they were actually listed as inmates.
Really?
In the census. They were listed as boarders, residences, and did I miss one? I know there's 2 more in there. There's like 5 different ways.
Well, times certainly have changed. That wasn't
Yeah.
politically correct
Really.
by our standards,
Really.
by any
Correct.
stretch of the imagination,
Correct.
right?
But as an orphanage, the overall, just looking physically at the structure, it was a working farm, as we had mentioned.
Right.
In that, you had your stables, you had your barn, you had a couple outbuildings, and these outbuildings were basically the original houses that the original farmers used to live in.
Oh, okay.
And once the orphanage initially was the nuns and the boarders, and then eventually the nuns moved into what we call the Bowman House annex that you can see on the end of
Yeah,
the.
I understand that was a house that was
actually moved over from
given
town.
to them
Right.
by,
Yes,
by the Bowman
benefactor.
family.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so that was attached to it. So at that point in time, the nuns moved into there, and the 2 outbuildings became the female and the male
Right.
Right. 'Cause
boarders.
they were separated.
Right,
Right.
They were
Well,
separated.
these people who lived there were actually the people who were hired. As I said, this was a big basically a
As
corporation.
cooks and caretakers.
So the nuns had to hire all these people, the farmers, because the kids couldn't do all the farming themselves. The nuns couldn't do the
Right.
farming.
Some stuff was
They had
were
to
too
hire
little.
seamstresses, cooks, nurse. There was a nurse there at one point in time. There was teachers there, because it was also a school, an elementary school. Okay, it was also, when you think about it, this building was a hotel. It housed 250 children.
Right.
And there was people had to take and go to not the rooms, because these were massive rooms, but to clean and maintain this, clean the bathrooms and all that stuff. The children helped out.
So there was so much involved just running
That's what I say. So
an organization like that.
In
Right.
1892, I believe it was, January 1892, I believe it was. You're going to test me on that one.
We'll have that fact.
Yeah,
finder.
There you go.
someone's going to correct me on that
Yeah.
because I put that in my quiz. I should forget. Anyway, the nuns, there was about 7 of them who initially incorporated in Massachusetts
Okay.
Right.
the
So they
orphanage.
did have an
It was belonged
incorporation.
and it was run by the nuns. There was approximately, in the whole time frame, there was probably 15 to 20 nuns who took care of these businesses. And so each one or two was responsible for each one of these, including taking care of 250 children.
Now, they were the Grey Nuns, right? Correct?
These were the Grey Nuns
Yeah.
of Montreal, yes.
Yeah, the Grey Nuns.
There's a whole story that we can
I
talk
know,
about.
there's
another
just
day.
so much we could
Right.
talk
Oh,
about. Just
correct.
They
Just-
also,
Right.
the nuns also went out and got money and
Oh, yeah.
and clothing and whatever they could get to help the children
Right.
and to keep it
keep it going.
moving. Right.
And it was also,
exactly.
funny enough, you can consider manufacturing because there was 250 children to clothe.
Yes.
It was also entertainment industry because children there were taught to dance and sing and to entertain benefactors and the families and everybody else around the area.
So,
And that was helped to bring funds
into the-
as well.
yep.
Right, as
So
fundraisers and
they
stuff like
constantly,
that.
and it's Christmas time, there was always a Christmas gala in which the Telegram Gazette, Santa came and
Wow.
handed out toys to all the kids
Wow.
every single year. And the people all around Worcester all chipped in and doing that.
And there was a lot of good people out there at that
Oh, yes,
time.
there
You
were.
mentioned that in your book.
Yeah, I mentioned in
And-
here too, and we want to thank all those people for.
Yeah, because
Yes.
they actually had really, times are tough, and they
Right.
had their own issues to
Exactly.
deal
Right.
with too. But yet they opened their hearts and their
home,
homes
exactly.
to children that were in this
Right.
orphanage, and that was very credible
Right.
when you stop and think
And
about
also
it.
family members. We can't forget that there was
The family
family members who
members.
stepped in and took their nieces and nephews, whatever it might be, into their homes for the
Like
holidays
ours,
or
yes.
whatever. Our family did the same thing,
Mm-hmm.
and so we appreciate every single one of those folks.
And that was a very important part of
Yes.
the children knowing someone cared
Exactly.
and
Help
loved
them to cope a
them.
little bit, give them a little
Right.
bit of sense that
Right.
there was some goodness out there.
Now, how long were you in? 2 years, you said?
We
We
were in
were
a
there
short
for
time.
2
We were
years.
short timers.
Yeah, short-timers, yeah.
There's people who've been there,
They were there
10,
most of their
12 years, the
lives.
entire,
Well, I
entire
remember
childhood.
Pat
Pat
called
was
that
there a
up.
long time.
Yeah,
She went from different orphanages.
Right, she
kept
was
coming back and forth.
she came as a guest on our original
Yes.
program, and she talked a little bit about that too as well.
Right.
And that it's really any time. I think they were 18 years old. Any time after that, they could leave.
Yeah,
Yeah,
boys
right?
boys had to leave at 12. Once
Yes,
once
I
they hit
remember
12 years,
reading that, yeah,
years old, they were
because
out.
of
They had to go to
because
boys.
of whatever testosterone
They
or
went
whatever.
to
I don't know.
workhouses.
Yeah,
Exactly,
they had to get
yeah.
the heck
Right.
out of
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
Because I think that the staff, the religious, that was a hard thing to do, to manage those kinds of teenage
Mm-hmm.
boys with some of their issues that they had. But go ahead, Joe, I didn't mean to interrupt
No,
you
that's
about
okay.
that.
No,
You wanted to...
I want to touch base on discipline because that was always a big thing. Let's see, I made notes here, and pardon me for kind of looking over here
Yeah,
real quick.
I know
but,
the nuns had, well, it was corporal punishment. I mean, back
Yeah.
then, that was what, obviously happened
Right.
at that time.
Pretty much, it was. You look at the orphanage as a militaristic facility. You had 250 kids. You had to keep control over them. Okay, no different
marched.
than you had. People from prison or from their strict family upbringing. There was a lot of folks who did that. Their families were that way, and also what was one another place? There was between the schools. Even the public schools had some of this in there.
Right.
So between all of that, you had the nuns, for instance. They would, you had that adage. There was an early to bed, early to rise.
Right.
And the children got up in the morning and they had to do their work. They had chores
They had
to do. I don't
chores.
care what the
They
age
had
was.
responsibilities.
Whether it was as much as just making your bed
Yeah.
or so on and so forth, going out there to hard labor working the farm. You had, as I said, 14 acres out there. Eventually, fortunately for us, when it turned into the 50s, most of those fields were turned into playgrounds
Oh,
because as time went on, you didn't need to support yourself as much. It was more benefactors and more other
Yeah.
produced
Yeah.
products out there, which is cheaper than trying to,
Yeah,
to do the farm.
right.
You know, they still had their pigs there and
Yeah.
they're stable and stuff, but not quite that it was when they had to really support themselves.
Right.
So it's quite a difference from those first 50 years.
For us, we were lucky because we were the singers and the dancers. And we did a lot of the shows, and the part of the book, we have a part of that, what we did, because it was just something that was such a important remembrance of it in a good
Way.
way.
It was
that
positive
we had to put it in the book.
Yeah, right.
and it
I
really
remember
excited
reading,
us.
the book itself is interesting from the perspective that it's very informative, and a lot of people don't know
Right.
actually what happened because
Right.
they weren't alive, number one, or their parents or grandparents didn't talk about it.
Right.
So that family, that disconnect actually happened in many families.
Yeah.
You know, you look back on any kind of family background and you'll see that if someone was adopted, those family records are kind of,
Right.
it takes an awful long
Right.
time to,
It does.
to
It does.
you know, get
A
through to
lot
that.
of folks, unfortunately, I've had talk about that, and that they've tried to go to Massachusetts, they tried to go to adoption places to try and find out their stories, and some of them were fortunate and got information, others got none. So,
Right.
in the same situation that you had, some children went to there and came out saying, "This is a terrible place. It was awful from day one to the day I got out of there." And I'd say,
Yeah.
it was
It was
okay.
okay,
I had to live
managed.
there, and
It
that's
was-
the way it was.
Just like Marcel
Fortunately,
and-
right, yeah. The story in the book there, I talk about Marceau and Ivan A. Bandit, which is Ivan Abandoned, who had a chip on his shoulder. Marcel was this was in the 40s, the radio show, where he was, hey, this is fine, my dad gives me worse at home, when
Yeah.
I was living at home.
Yeah.
Where Ivan was thrown into there, abandoned by his father, abandoned,
mother died,
passed
yeah.
away, and he was stuck there, and everything happened was bad for him. So we tried to show
To
the
show-
coping between what one child had and what the others. So when we see emails or stories posted there, we see the differences. Such a wide range. We scratch our
The
head.
experiences.
Why is she saying
Yeah.
that? Why is he saying that? And
Well,
why is
people
their story different?
internalize things differently.
Exactly.
It's like that's-
And depending on where they came from when they were younger, before they went in, what happened to them after they went in.
Mm-hmm.
And it made a big difference on what they remember and how they relate it to the story. So it was interesting.
And you guys, oftentimes, when you and I had talked about it, we talked about the orphan train, and we talked about
Exactly.
that, just pre-show here. At that time, there were a lot of misplaced children after the Depression, and a lot of children, that book, The Orphan Train, I was fortunate enough to see the author down in Florida and listen to her dissertation on that book, and it was so fascinating that children, some of them weren't even orphans, and they were shipped out to the Midwest, and
That's what happened.
Yeah,
And as you said, they were hoping to get a nice place to live,
Adopted.
and unfortunately, some of them, were used
Yeah.
for just free labor.
Yeah,
Or,
right.
physically, sexually, mentally abused.
Yeah, they were.
And then you
and
get
it's
to
a
the other
story.
side. You get the other side of the ocean where this big story of the children
Oranges
from
and
they called it Oranges
and
Oranges
Sunshine.
and Sunshine, where over 100,000 children from the World War II era of England were shipped to Australia,
Right.
and they were promised oranges and sunshine, and instead they ended up getting physical, sexual abuse. They were used as physical labor, and they spent a lifetime of mental anguish over all that.
Right,
And
right.
it took the government of England over 50 years
For them to
acknowledge it
acknowledge it, yeah.
And apologize for
apologize
that.
for it.
I
Correct.
mean, at the time, when catastrophic things were happening, our social services, they didn't have the resources, and unfortunately, back in the day, that's
Well, that's what happened during the 50s. As I said, when we were in the 50s, the St. Ian's basically started out in the early 50s with bringing in children like ourselves, almost as boarders, okay? Mom had to work, they were divorced, like our parents were, and a lot of them were just taken in because they were getting income from that to help support. Later on, in the end of the 50s, the Archdiocese came up and said, we can't keep on doing this. Things are changing. It's now getting close to the 60s. The Massachusetts Department of Family Services, or whatever they called it back then, is saying, no, you can't do this. You can't have this discipline that you're doing. You cannot raise a hand to a child. You can't do those type of things. Things have got to change. And nuns were, at that point in time, were actually sent to school to learn how to manage the modern children services. Yeah. And so things started to change. And by the 60s, the orphanage went from over, I think we had like almost 200, down to 50 children. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And those were the ones that were more or less there as supposedly as a temporary stay before they were passed on to the foster homes. Right. So, and that from that point on, and when it became Mount St. Anne in 1970, and the new buildings were there and they brought them in, there was only room for 48 children. Right. And, a place for some of the girls, again, separation of the girls and the boys and all that type of thing. And once in a while, they'd actually bring in a family with 5 or 6, 7 children, and they would actually put them in a building. And that's how Mount St. Anne became the new rebirth of St. Anne's, the orphanage.
Yeah. And the Cubans that came from Cuba.
Yeah, there was a whole group of Cuban children that came over during the missile crisis back then in the 60s. Right.
Well, so, it certainly had a very, very interesting history. Mm-hmm. And it's lost. And it's lost, but you've preserved it, though. Right. You have preserved it. How many people do you think have actually logged on to the website? You had a number.
Funny enough, I didn't put it. There's no count on it. The website is new, so and so most of the people who have seen our Facebook have gone in and looked at it.
But it's been thousands, hasn't it?
But there's been, I would say, hundreds of people have looked at. A lot of people have come in and said, I know about this or that. I may or may not have been there. Right. We passed them on to solid information, and they found out no, they weren't there. They were somewhere else.
It was a resource for a lot of people, right?
Exactly, it became a resource for some. It became a home and a friendship site for the people to say. Yes. Just like today, we're going off to lunch and we're meeting with some of the people. That we've been talking with the last 2 years. There's new people showing up for the luncheon today, and every single day, we seem to have a new person show up and say, "Hey,
tell us their story,
tell me,
or their family's story, their
so
mother
we're
or father."
Constantly sending out books to everybody to let them know.
That's wonderful. And I know Pat, when Pat was here, you guys tell me the story about Pat, and she was there at the same time, and you recognized her.
Right.
When you were
we just like instantly knew each other, and it was wonderful. And I have a sister. This is my sister. She sent me a thing and said, "I'm your sister."
Oh, that's so nice. But really, that was great. And there were so many other people that you made a connection with, and they made a connection.
It was surprising how quickly,
it's
when we put the Facebook up, within 2 weeks, my dance partner showed up saying, "That's me. That's me with you."
Isn't that great?
And another girl, I had a picture of me during the November celebration of the United States Marine Corps birthday with me and this girl, and she said, "That's me. That's me." It was so surprising to see all those.
Well, the internet with the social networks that we have now, it's amazing that you can find people. Right. And that's a blessing, really.
And we got pictures and pictures of us that we never even knew existed, of us dancing. Right. And that's how we knew that what we dreamt about was actually true.
Yeah, that's something I wanted to bring up. As children, sometimes we get confused with what is real and what wasn't real. So you guys understood that, and when you
the reality hit us. Oh my God!
Yes,
that's where the emotions come in.
Yes, the emotional aspect of that is so strong. But just think of how many people that you've helped to understand what went on in their lives at that time.
And who they are.
And who
they are. Like,
and a lot of them are coping a lot with that, appreciating the book for that, and look at it as not necessarily closure, but working towards that closure.
That's right. Some people it'll take longer,
Some people who have gone through have lived their lives.
It may never happen.
Right.
But at least you've given them sort of the tools.
Well, they know they're not alone.
They're not alone.
As we were saying, there's over 11,000 ghosts of St. Anne's past.
Wow. We also know that we weren't alone, and we always felt we were unworthy, and that nobody cared about us. And then since we've met a lot of these new people, well, they're not new, they're past acquaintances.
That's right.
That we realized we weren't alone. And gosh knows, if we were 7 years old or 5 years old, if we had
Right.
known that then,
Right.
we wouldn't have lived 60 years thinking nobody
Right.
really cared.
Well, this is, the story is not unlike many others that have suffered in their early childhood.
Right.
And it takes almost a lifetime, and some people it never heals. But it does take a lifetime. And I really am so appreciative that we had the opportunity for both of you to come back. And, well, Joe to
wonderful.
come,
It's wonderful.
to come
Yeah.
back,
Unfortunately, I
Rosie
wasn't
to
here last
come
time,
back.
but I appreciate
You
you
were
coming
out of
back
the
and doing
country
this.
or something, and you weren't
Yes.
able to
Yes.
to meet with us. But Rosie, we said we'd try to get another program going.
This
and
is wonderful.
I've had a couple of people actually, I've given the book to a couple of people, and they've read it and given it back to me and said, gee, I never knew that. Thank you for doing that. So thanks so much, and I hope that this goes forward and many other people get some sort of closure.
Well, we hope so for them.
I
Hopefully
do.
that more and more people look in there. The younger people who are still working hard at their own lives right now, who eventually will start looking, and that it'll be there for them.
Well, I thank you both
I
for
thank
being
you
guests
too.
here
Thank you very
today.
much.
I want to
And-
thank all the children from St. Anne's and say,
Yes.
soiree.
Smile.
You'll find
Smile.
that life is still worthwhile if you just smile.
And with that, that's a wonderful closing. I'm going to close for today. And as always, it was wonderful to be with you. And thanks for joining us on Close to Home.